Hey guys, tonight we're heading out to sea. Imagine this, you're on a creaky pirate ship, the wind howling in your ears, the salty spray hitting your face as waves crash against the sides. You're a pirate now, but trust me, it's not as glamorous as you've been led to believe. The pirates you've heard about. They probably didn't make it past their 30s, and they were mostly struggling just to survive. You probably won't survive this either. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and the time you're listening. I'm curious where you are in the world as we take this journey. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment you step onto that pirate ship, you'll feel the world shift beneath you. The horizon is endless and bleak, and the ship creaks like it might collapse any moment. It's not the golden age of piracy that you might have imagined from all those movie nights. In fact, it's a world of grime hunger and hard work. As you stumble over the slippery boards trying to find your footing, you realize that the sea doesn't care about your dreams of adventure. It's only interested in one thing: survival. You're going to have to work for every scrap of food and that rum you've heard so much about. Don't expect any unless you've got the stomach to steal it from a fellow pirate. You look around. The crew is a mix of rough, tired faces. There's no swagger, no flashy pirate attire, just a lot of tattered clothes and gaunt expressions. Most of these men and women have seen more than enough of this harsh life. They've either signed on because there was no other choice, or they've been running from something much like you. Historians still argue whether the romanticized vision of pirates' captains in flamboyant hats searching for treasure on the high seas ever truly existed. In reality, most pirates were desperate souls. There were no pirate codes written in grand letters or treasure chests waiting to be found. This wasn't about freedom or rebellion, it was about survival. Pirates didn't have fancy banners or a chance at glory. They had bad weather, bad food, and no place to call home. The sea was a prison. But you don't have much choice now, do you? The sea stretches out before you, unforgiving, vast, and endless. The promise of adventure is just a whisper in the wind as you trudge onward, eyes glued to the endless horizon. You realize this is your life now, fighting for survival against the elements and your fellow crew members. The captain's voice booms from somewhere above you. He's shouting orders, and as much as you might want to ignore him, you know you can't. You'll work, or you'll face consequences. No one's really sure why he's in charge. He's just the loudest, and maybe the craziest of them all. That's what leadership is on this ship. It's not about respect. It's about who can yell the loudest and make people believe they're in charge. And when you think about it, that doesn't sound too different from the world you left behind. Before you know it, you're back to scrubbing the deck with a dull, splintering brush, the smell of salt water and old fish filling your nostrils. The sun is barely visible behind thick clouds, and you can barely see the ship's rudder, much less any land. As the day stretches on, you realize the true meaning of pirate life. It's not the stuff of legends, it's just a grueling existence. If you make it long enough to see a pirate ship, it might be your last. You're more likely to die from disease, starvation, or a mutiny than you are from any treasure hunt. And those pirate ships aren't the sleek, fast vessels you see in movies. No, these ships are battered, slow, and almost as miserable as the people aboard them. Historians still argue whether piracy was ever about treasure in the first place. Most pirates had no real interest in gold. What they were really after was the ability to feed themselves and survive another day at sea. And so you toil. But the question lingers, will you ever be more than just a cog in the wheel of this floating death trap? Or will the sea claim you too, like it has so many others before? You've got to wonder, is it worth it? As the waves crash against the sides of the ship, you realize you don't have an answer. You're just here drifting along in this miserable existence, waiting for something anything to change. Now that you're settled in and starting to get the rhythm of life on board, let's get real about the pirate basics. You've probably been daydreaming about treasure adventure and a carefree life out at sea. The truth, you're hungry, exhausted, and barely hanging on. Piracy wasn't the flashy lifestyle you imagined, it was just hard work day after day. Forget what movies told you about the lavish pirate life. This is about survival, and not just against the elements, but against the constant struggle for food, water, and any scraps of comfort you can find. Pirates weren't living it up in some luxury villa on a tropical island. Life on a pirate ship was miserable. Most pirates didn't get their own cabins, and they sure as heck weren't lounging around sipping rum while planning their next big heist. Instead, they were cramped together in filthy quarters, often with little to no privacy, fighting for a place to sleep while the waves rocked the ship. And that pirate gold you hear about, well, most of it was either stolen from other pirates lost in storms or completely useless by the time it was obtained. Forget the idea of bags of treasure. This life wasn't about gold, it was about scraping by. You can hear the crew grumbling as they move from task to task. Some of them are barely hanging on, looking more like skeletal versions of their former selves. Others are too far gone to care their faces, etched with the weariness of years spent out at sea. You've probably been on ships before, maybe even sailed for pleasure. But this isn't a leisure cruise, it's a constant grind. The days blur together as you scrub the deck or trim the sails, your back aching under the weight of the work, the sun beating down relentlessly. And food, well, let's just say it's not what you were hoping for. There's no fresh fruit, no warm bread, nothing that makes your mouth water. Instead, you're stuck eating hardtack rock-hard biscuits that have probably been sitting in a barrel for weeks, if not months. The texture is so dry it feels like you're chewing on a chunk of wood, and the taste is like, well, cardboard, if cardboard could somehow become worse. A handful of salt pork might be thrown your way, but it's often rotten and covered in mold. And when the barrels of water run low, you're left with stale, brackish water that tastes more like seaweed than anything drinkable. You probably think a pirate crew would have a way of making all this more bearable, maybe even a little fun. But most pirates were just as miserable as you are now. You're stuck on this ship, not because you've found a calling, but because you have no better options. The life of a pirate isn't glorious. It's simply a desperate scramble to stay alive. The crew isn't there for camaraderie, they're there because they're trying to escape something worse. And sometimes that's the worst part. You'll never be truly free, not as long as you're stuck on this ship. Historians still argue about how much freedom pirates really had. Were they rebellious spirits fighting against the system, or were they just criminals with a different code? Some suggest that the pirate life was one of egalitarianism, where everyone had a say in what happened on the ship. Maybe that's true in a very basic sense, but the reality is that pirates operated in a cutthroat environment where only the strong survived. And let's be honest, there's not much freedom when you're starving and shackled to a ship with a bunch of strangers who might turn on you the second the opportunity arises. And even if there was a code of conduct, it didn't help you when things got rough. Sure, pirates had a pirate code, a set of rules they claimed to follow, but those rules were mostly about dividing loot and punishing dishonesty. When it came to surviving the brutality of the sea, those rules didn't do much to protect you from the dangers that really mattered. Pirates were just as vulnerable to sickness storms and bad luck as anyone else. And if things went terribly wrong, there wasn't a lot of sympathy. If you got caught stealing, you were likely to find yourself in the worst possible position, thrown overboard, or worse. The lack of fresh food, proper medicine, and basic amenities isn't just an inconvenience. It's a matter of life or death. Pirates didn't have access to the luxuries you might think. There was no fresh water waiting for you when you needed it. No cushy bed to sleep in after a long day of work. The reality was harsh, unforgiving, and far from any romanticized version you've been told about. The idea that pirates were living some free, adventurous life is a myth that simply doesn't hold up when you take a closer look at what they actually endured. The sea is merciless, and so is the life of a pirate. You were likely promised a better future when you signed up, but all you're getting now is the miserable reality of a life at sea that's nothing like the legends. And yet somehow, you keep going. Because what else is there? You're stuck in this fight for survival, and you don't have a choice but to keep your head down and trudge through each day. As you stare out at the endless water, you realize you may never see land again. But at least for now, that's the least of your problems. In the end, the pirate life isn't about treasure. It's about scraping by in a world that doesn't care. You'll fight for scraps, fight for survival, and pray you don't end up overboard before the end of the day. Let's talk about your ship. You might think you found yourself on some impressive vessel, one that'll cut through the waves and get you to your treasure in no time. But no, this ship is a floating death trap. The kind of vessel that makes you question every life decision that led you to this point. The pirate ship you've landed on is not some sleek, fast schooner, but a creaking, poorly maintained monstrosity held together with rope's tar and sheer hope. When you first stepped aboard, the smell hit you saltwater mildew rot. It's almost as if the ship itself is alive, trying to drag you under with it. You can feel the boards beneath your feet groan as they struggle to keep the ship afloat. You look up and see the sails tattered and torn, flapping uselessly in the wind. There's no way this ship should still be afloat. But somehow it is, and you're stuck on it along with dozens of other unfortunate souls just trying to make it through the day. You're going to get used to the creaking. You'll hear it at night when you're lying awake, the sound of the ship slowly sinking beneath you, or so it seems. Every wave that strikes the hull seems like it might be the one that cracks the ship in half, sending you straight to the bottom of the sea. Every leak that springs in the deck is a reminder of how fragile your existence is. And as much as you try to ignore it, the reality of your situation is clear. Your ship is a ticking time bomb. The worst part, you can't escape it. You can't just jump off and swim to safety. There's nowhere to go. The endless expanse of ocean is your prison, and the ship is the cage. The crew might tell you that you're part of something great, that piracy is your chance at freedom. But in reality, you're stuck on a ship that barely functions, surrounded by people who are just as desperate as you are. Some of them are probably crazier too. The longer you stay on this ship, the more you start to feel like you're losing your grip on sanity. As you look around, you notice the ship's other problems. The hull is cracked in places, water seeps through the cracks every time the ship rocks. The ropes and sails, which should be finely tuned, are fraying, and the mast tilts precariously to one side. You can't help but feel that at any moment, the whole thing could go down in flames, or worse, get stuck in the middle of the ocean, with no way to get help. There's no lifeboat to save you, no safety net, and certainly no guarantee that the crew will be able to patch things up in time if disaster strikes. You might also notice that the deck is covered in stains. Blood stains, oil stains, and God knows what else. The wood is slick with grime, making it treacherous to walk on, especially when the ship is rocking. There's no escape from the mess. The crew constantly has to scrub the deck to prevent it from becoming a breeding ground for disease, but it's a never-ending task, and the dirt never truly goes away. It's a reminder that you're stuck in this place, constantly fighting a losing battle against filth and decay. The sea is a harsh, unforgiving mistress, and she'll break down everything: your ship, your body, and even your spirit. Most of the time, it feels like the ship is on its last legs. The ship's timbers groan under the pressure, and the sails flutter weakly, as if they too are exhausted from the constant battle against the wind and rain. The crew members try their best to keep it together, but every day is a new struggle to keep the ship afloat. And honestly, some days it doesn't seem worth it. Historians still debate whether pirate ships were actually as poorly constructed as some suggest. While it's true that many pirate vessels were taken from other ships or repurposed for piracy, others were purposefully outfitted for speed or maneuverability. However, even the best pirate ships were still subjected to the harsh realities of life at sea: storms, pests, and constant wear and tear. No matter how great the ship might have once been, after months or years of hard use, it was bound to show signs of serious degradation. The sea doesn't care about your ship's condition. It'll wear it down just as easily as it wears down your spirit. You probably think the ship would be the worst of your problems, right? But no, being on this ship means dealing with more than just the vessel itself. You've got the crew to think about. And let's just say they're not the most pleasant people. There's constant tension on board. Pirates don't exactly make the best neighbors. In fact, the closer you get to other crew members, the more you realize that no one is here because they want to be. Everyone has their own story. Some of them have escaped from prison, others are fleeing from their past mistakes, and some are just lost souls who've nowhere else to go. Pirates didn't just form out of the blue. They were desperate men, and sometimes women, who had nothing left but the sea. With each passing day, the crew becomes less like a team and more like a ticking time bomb of stress and resentment. The captain's authority is only as good as the crew's willingness to follow him, and if you cross someone, you might find yourself in a dangerous situation. There are always whispers about mutiny, and sometimes when the captain's temper flares, you can almost feel the anger and frustration bubbling under the surface. You've probably noticed that the only time the crew really comes together is when there's a fight either over food or power, and the rest of the time they're just waiting for something to give. Pirate ships were never models of cooperation. Despite what you might imagine, the pirates didn't have a utopian society where everyone was equal. Instead, it was a brutal, self-serving existence where anyone could turn on anyone else if the opportunity arose. Whether you're a captain or a deckhand, you're always walking a tightrope. There's no such thing as safety when your ship is falling apart and your crew is full of tension. The longer you stay on this miserable boat, the more you'll realize that there's no easy escape from this life. You're stuck here whether you like it or not, and the only way out might be a swift, brutal end. The only thing keeping you going now is the hope that you'll survive just a little longer, maybe find some treasure or a shore to rest on before the ship sinks completely. You're starting to get used to life on the pirate ship. Well, maybe used to isn't quite the right phrase, let's go with accepting it. Every day is a struggle for survival, not just against the brutal sea, but against your fellow crew members. It's like you're stuck in a pressure cooker with nowhere to go. The captain. You probably hate them by now, but don't get too comfortable. They're not the worst thing you'll encounter. Oh no, that distinction belongs to the rest of the crew. Let's talk about the captain first, though. In theory, the captain should be a figure of authority, someone you look up to, someone with a grand vision for the future. In reality, they're probably a loud, unpredictable tyrant who keeps the crew in line through fear, violence, or sheer force of will. You're stuck with a captain who rules with a fist wrapped in leather, with little concern for anyone but themselves. If you've managed to avoid their wrath so far, count yourself lucky. But that won't last forever. Soon enough, you'll come face to face with the kind of captain who doesn't care about the lives of their crew, they just want results. And if they don't get what they want, you're in for a rough time. Sometimes the best case scenario is that your captain's just crazy, not actively evil. But even that's terrifying. You'll notice their odd little rituals and strange superstitions. Maybe they mutter to themselves or pace the deck like a wolf circling its prey. There's an instability in their eyes, an air of unpredictability that makes you uneasy. You start to understand that there's a fine line between leadership and madness, and most captains of pirate ships walked it every day. But what if you're the captain? Let's face it, being in charge of this ragtag group of misfits isn't exactly a dream job. You're constantly walking a tightrope, always needing to balance between keeping your crew in line and avoiding mutiny. You can shout, threaten, and make promises of treasure, but at the end of the day, these pirates are only loyal to their own survival. You don't have a loyal army behind you. You have a group of opportunistic criminals just waiting for the right moment to stab you in the back. Being a captain means you're constantly trying to keep everyone in check, making sure there's enough food, enough water, and enough reason to keep everyone from turning on each other. Every decision you make, every order you give could lead to disaster. If you make the wrong call, you risk everything. If you're lucky, you'll have a few loyal men by your side, but they're just as desperate as you are, and they'll abandon you the moment things go south. Even worse, if you're a good captain, you still have to deal with a crew full of bad pirates. And the worst part is that even the worst pirates don't get the luxury of quitting. They're stuck on this ship as much as you are, and they're just as tired of being here as you are. So they're angry. They're resentful. They're looking for any excuse to start a fight, and you don't have the power to stop them. Historians still debate whether pirate crews were more prone to mutiny because of bad leadership or because of the nature of the pirate lifestyle itself. Was it the unstable, often tyrannical captains who caused the unrest, or was it the constant struggle for survival that led to rebellion? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Pirates didn't have much of a sense of loyalty, at least not to each other. Their sense of loyalty was to their own survival, and in this world of constant danger, the only way to stay alive was to be prepared to fight for what you wanted. Whether that meant challenging the captain or picking fights with other crew members, mutiny was always just a step away. Even when things were going well, mutiny was always on the horizon. Pirates, by their nature, were rebels. They didn't follow orders well, especially when those orders came from someone who wasn't a fellow pirate or someone they felt they could trust. So the tension was always there, simmering beneath the surface. The longer you spent on the ship, the more you could feel it in the air. Crew members eyeing each other, whispering in corners, glaring when they thought no one was looking. But it's not just the captain you need to worry about, it's the crew as a whole. The pirates you've signed up with are not your friends. They're desperate, angry, and often downright crazy. They're just as likely to turn on you as they are to work with you. Sure, you might find a few people who seem trustworthy, but that trust is fragile. You never know when one of them might snap, when one of them might decide to take a bit more than their fair share of the loot, or when someone might just be tired of the constant grind and decide to make a break for it. The pirate life isn't about camaraderie, it's about survival. Pirates don't have the luxury of friendship. They're out here because they have no other choice, and every person on this ship is a threat in some way, even if they're not actively planning your downfall. Every day is a gamble, and some days the odds are stacked against you. You could make a misstep, say the wrong thing, or show a moment of weakness, and that could be enough to get you into trouble. You'll see fights break out over anything. A small disagreement can quickly escalate into a full-blown brawl. It's all about dominance, who's in control, and who gets to call the shots. The slightest insult could lead to violence, and if you don't want to end up on the wrong side of that fight, you'll need to know when to keep your mouth shut and when to stand your ground. One of the worst parts of being on a pirate ship: no one ever really sleeps. You'll find yourself tossing and turning in your hammock, listening to the constant creaking of the ship, the howling wind, and the faint, unsettling sounds of whispers in the dark. It's not just the ship that's haunted, it's the people on it. Everyone's got something to hide, and no one's completely sane after months or even years at sea. There's no telling who you can trust, and it's always a game of survival. Who's going to snap first? Who's next in line to be betrayed? And as much as you might hate it, you'll start to realize that there's no getting off this ship. The sea is your only company now. There's no way to escape. And the people around you are as dangerous as the waves crashing against the ship's hull. The captain's not the only one you need to worry about. You'll find that the real threat is the crew, all of them just waiting for the moment they can turn the ship to their advantage. So now that you've been living the pirate life for a while, you're beginning to understand the true nature of your existence. You're probably starting to wonder, is there any freedom to be had in this life, or are you just another criminal? at the mercy of the sea. Pirates weren't exactly the bold rebels they've been portrayed as in movies and books. In fact, pirates were often just criminals running from their pasts, avoiding the law, or fleeing lives of poverty or despair. The idea that pirates were some kind of heroic outlaws fighting for freedom is mostly a myth. Sure, some pirates were more idealistic than others, but for most piracy wasn't about adventure, it was about survival. You've probably heard it a million times before. Pirates were often glorified as freedom fighters roaming the seas in search of justice and treasure. But when you strip away the myths, the truth is far more grim. The reality is that pirates were more likely to be criminals than crusaders. They were outcasts from society, people with no other options but to take to the seas. The pirate ship wasn't some utopia, it was a desperate, volatile world where violence and betrayal were the only constants. And let's not forget about the golden age of piracy. Most pirates didn't live the lavish lifestyle you might expect. There were no piles of treasure, no grand palaces, no luxurious feasts. Instead, pirates were stuck on terrible, rotting ships, fighting for every scrap of food, and sometimes even turning on each other for survival. Historians still debate whether pirates were ever really about the fight for freedom, or just a collection of criminals with no other means of survival. Was piracy a rebellion against the oppressive powers of the time, or was it just a convenient excuse for a life of theft, violence, and lawlessness? The truth is that pirates didn't have the kind of noble cause that Hollywood would have you believe. They weren't fighting against some grand evil empire, they were fighting for their own survival. They didn't care about freeing the oppressed. They cared about finding treasure, escaping the law, and avoiding starvation. Pirates were often desperate, hungry people who'd rather risk their lives on the high seas than starve in some port town. You've probably noticed by now that piracy isn't a glamorous life. And if you haven't, trust me, you will. As you spend more time aboard your ship, the appeal of a pirate's life starts to fade. The constant struggle to find food and fresh water, the miserable conditions on board, the ever-present threat of storms and disease, none of it feels very adventurous. If you're being honest with yourself, you might even start to wonder whether you'd be better off taking your chances on land. But that's not an option. The sea is your prison, and you're stuck with the crew you've got. So, let's talk about that crew for a moment. No, not the captain, the other pirates. Sure, some of them are probably all right, but most of them, well, they're just as desperate as you are. And that means you're surrounded by a group of criminals, each one as likely to turn on you as they are to share their last morsel of food. You've probably heard stories about pirates who form tight-knit, loyal crews, but that's mostly fiction. The reality is that pirates were often motivated by self-interest, and trust was a rare commodity. The pirate code, that mythical set of rules that we've all heard about, was often just a formality. Yes, there were rules about dividing loot and punishing dishonesty. But when it came down to survival, the code didn't mean much. If someone got too greedy, or if there was a power struggle, the rules were forgotten faster than you could say, mutiny. Pirates didn't operate on some high-minded sense of morality. They operated on a strict hierarchy of power and survival. The stronger you were, the more you could get away with. And if you weren't strong enough, well, tough luck. As much as you might wish things were different, there's no escaping the harsh reality of pirate life. You're stuck on this ship, stuck with this crew, and there's no easy way out. There's no glorious treasure awaiting you, no easy path to freedom. The pirate life is a life of constant struggle and fear. Even when things are going well, there's always that nagging feeling in the back of your mind, when will the next storm hit? When will the next mutiny start? You can't afford to let your guard down, not for a second. This is no longer an adventure. It's a grind, a constant fight to survive. And let's talk about the really grim stuff for a second. Even if you manage to survive the daily battles of pirate life, getting through the storms, the food shortages, the constant tension with your crew, there's still the matter of the law. It's no secret that piracy was illegal. And while you might think you've escaped the reach of the law by taking to the high seas, you're wrong. The authorities are always hunting pirates, and sooner or later, they'll catch up to you. Pirates didn't just live a dangerous life because of other pirates, they had to worry about the navies of the world as well. Naval forces were constantly on the lookout for pirates, and they had far more resources than any pirate crew could ever hope for. The moment a pirate ship was spotted, the chase would begin. And when you're up against a well-armed Navy ship, the odds are never in your favor. You might think you're a clever and capable pirate, but you're no match for the firepower of a fully equipped Navy ship. Pirates knew this, of course, but it didn't stop them from fighting for their lives. They were outlaws, and their only option was to keep running, keep fighting, and hope they didn't get caught. So what's the reality of piracy? It's a hard, brutal life that doesn't offer the romanticized adventures you've been promised. Pirates didn't get rich, they didn't live lavishly, and they certainly didn't have the kind of freedom they imagined. What they had was a life filled with danger, betrayal, and an ever-present fear of death. Pirates may have been criminals, but they were also survivors. And survival, as it turns out, is the only real treasure to be found on the high seas. Historians still argue whether pirates were ever more than criminals looking for a way to escape the grim realities of their time. Some argue that piracy was born out of a desire for freedom, while others insist it was simply a way for outcasts to make a living. Whatever the case may be, the truth is that pirate life wasn't about freedom, it was about making it through another day on the water. And the longer you're stuck in this world, the more you'll realize that the only treasure worth fighting for is your own survival. Now that you've spent some time getting the hang of things aboard this pirate ship, let's talk about something even worse than the crumbling ship and the rotten food. The daily grind of living in an environment that's actively trying to kill you. That's right, the life of a pirate wasn't just about running into the occasional storm or getting into a skirmish with the Navy. It was a constant fight against something far more sinister. Your own body slowly deteriorating under the relentless conditions of life at sea. No fresh food, no fresh water, and no way to escape the diseases that constantly threatened your crew. This was the reality pirates faced day in and day out. Let's start with one of the most notorious afflictions that plagued pirates: scurvy. If you've heard the word before, you probably picture it as some old-timey disease, something that doesn't affect you today. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, scurvy was a killer, especially for pirates. The disease was caused by a lack of vitamin C, which is found in fresh fruits and vegetables. Pirates stuck out on the open ocean for months on end often had no access to fresh food. All they had was hardtack salted meat and whatever else they could salvage from the sea. The result: after months of eating nothing but dried food, pirates would start to experience the symptoms of scurvy, swollen gums, rotting teeth, fatigue, and joint pain. The disease could make even the most hardened pirate weak and helpless. In severe cases, pirates would start to bleed from their gums, and eventually scurvy would lead to death if not treated. The worst part, no one understood what caused scurvy back then, and pirates had no idea how to cure it. They would simply wait and hope that their bodies didn't break down completely before they could find land again. Then, there were the other diseases that ran rampant aboard pirate ships. Dysentery, a gastrointestinal disease caused by bacteria or parasites, was another common affliction. The cramped, filthy conditions on board meant that disease spread quickly, and without any effective treatment, it was often a death sentence. Dysentery could cause severe diarrhea, dehydration, and fever, and for many pirates, it was a slow and agonizing way to die. If you were unlucky enough to catch it, you'd probably be too weak to work, and you'd quickly fall behind the rest of the crew. And, as if that wasn't enough, there were also the usual dangers: infections from cuts and wounds, and even simple things like sunburn, which in the absence of sunscreen could lead to serious complications. Speaking of infections, life on a pirate ship meant that you'd inevitably suffer from 1 or 2 minor wounds along the way. Whether it's a cut from a knife while working the rigging, or a scrape from a rusty nail while trying to fix the ship, these small injuries could easily get infected. Pirates didn't have antiseptics or even proper medical care, so infections quickly spread through the crew. Without antibiotics, an infection that would be a minor inconvenience today could become deadly. The most common treatment was to simply let the infection run its course, and if you were lucky, you'd survive it. If you weren't well, it was another reminder that the pirate life wasn't as glamorous as people made it out to be. But there's more to the daily grind than just sickness and injury. There's the physical toll of simply existing on a ship. Working on the rigging, scrubbing the deck, pulling up anchors, and sailing through storm after storm takes a toll on your body. Even if you're young and strong, you're going to feel the effects of the harsh conditions. You're working in cramped, wet, and dangerous conditions. The constant rocking of the ship makes everything feel unstable, and the stress of knowing that any wave could tear your ship apart makes it hard to focus on anything else. You'll find yourself constantly tired, exhausted from the day-to-day battle for survival. One of the worst things about the pirate life is the lack of sleep. You might think that a life on the sea would have its moments of rest, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Even if you're lucky enough to have a hammock, sleep is a rare luxury. The constant motion of the ship makes it nearly impossible to get a good night's sleep. You're always rocking back and forth, and the sound of waves crashing against the hull never stops. Even when you're not on lookout or handling the sails, there's always something to be done. There's never a moment where you can truly let your guard down. The only time you're allowed to rest is when the ship is docked, but even then you're surrounded by a crew of desperate men, each with their own agenda, making it hard to truly relax. Historians still argue whether the pirate lifestyle with its brutal conditions was a necessary evil or just a reflection of the desperate situation pirates found themselves in. Some argue that pirates only turned to this life because they had no other options, while others claim that the nature of piracy was always violent and unforgiving. It's hard to deny that the harshness of pirate life often led to a bleak, miserable existence. Pirates weren't living the high life they were living, a life of constant danger, disease, and deprivation. And while there might have been moments of excitement or glory, those moments were few and far between. The majority of pirate life was about scraping by, battling your own body and the elements, and hoping that you survived just a little bit longer. If you're still hanging on, though, you might have noticed that surviving these conditions isn't just about health and stamina. It's about the psychological toll. Being stuck on a ship in constant danger of dying from disease or drowning does something to your mind. It wears you down day after day until you start to question whether this life is worth it. You've probably had moments where you've wondered if it's better to just jump overboard and take your chances in the ocean than keep fighting through each brutal day. But that's not an option. There's no easy way out on a pirate ship, and the longer you stay, the more you start to see the truth. Your mind and body will both break down if you don't find a way to cope with the stress. In the end, this is the reality of pirate life. It's not about treasure or freedom, it's about survival. It's about fighting your own body, the ship, the crew, and the sea itself just to stay alive for one more day. And when you realize that, you begin to understand that the pirate life wasn't about adventure. It was about making it to the next sunrise, hoping that somehow, some way, you could keep your head above water physically and mentally. And if you didn't, well, that's just another pirate story, one that ends with no fanfare, just the harsh realities of a life at sea. By now, you've probably noticed that life on a pirate ship is more about survival than anything else. The days blur into each other, and the struggle to stay alive becomes your only focus. But there's something else you can't ignore: the constant tension between you and the Navy. You might think that piracy is all about raiding merchant ships and living free, but in reality, the most dangerous thing a pirate could face wasn't another pirate. It was the relentless pursuit of naval forces. The Navy was always watching. Pirates, after all, were criminals, and piracy was an open declaration of war against the state. So, the moment a pirate ship was spotted, the authorities would send their best ships after you. The Navy wasn't messing around. They had far more resources and firepower than any pirate could muster. So, every time a Navy ship appeared on the horizon, the game changed. It wasn't just about loot anymore, it was about life and death. Suddenly, everything you've done in the past weeks, months, or even years feels completely pointless. There's no gold in the world that's worth risking your life in a sea battle. You've probably already gotten a taste of the stress that comes with being hunted. Pirates didn't have the luxury of a fortress or an army to protect them. The open sea was their domain, but the Navy was just as comfortable there. A pirate captain always had to be on alert, always planning for the worst-case scenario. When you see a Navy ship approaching, you don't have time to think about treasure or glory. You have to think about how to escape, how to outmaneuver them, or worse yet, how to fight. At first, you might think that your pirate ship is fast and nimble, but that's the kind of thinking that gets pirates killed. While your ship might be able to outrun a merchant vessel, the Navy ships are much faster, better armed, and have crews trained to hunt pirates. Pirates might have a small advantage in terms of surprise, but when it comes down to a direct confrontation, the odds are stacked against you. It's not just about skill with a sword or a musket, it's about strategy, knowing when to fight and when to run. The Navy doesn't play fair, they have everything on their side, and they know how to use it. Historians still debate whether pirates were more effective as raiders or as warriors trying to escape the Navy. Some argue that pirates thrived in the chaos of the high seas, attacking merchant ships and vanishing before the Navy could respond. Others suggest that the best pirates were the ones who knew how to evade naval ships, using their knowledge of the sea to stay one step ahead. But whatever the strategy, one thing is certain: when a Navy ship comes into view, the entire crew knows that survival is the only thing that matters. It's not just the chase that wears you down, though, it's the constant fear of being caught. You're never truly safe, not while the Navy is out there. You might go days or weeks without seeing any sign of the enemy, but the moment you let your guard down, that's when they show up. Pirates had to live with the constant knowledge that at any moment their ship could be overrun, their crew captured, and their lives forfeit. There's no escape from that fear, and it hangs over you like a dark cloud every time you set sail. And if you are caught, well, there's no happy ending for you. You won't be thrown in a cozy prison cell with 3 square meals a day. No pirates who were captured faced brutal consequences. The Navy didn't just want to lock you up, they wanted to make an example out of you. Hanging was common, and it wasn't a pretty death. Pirates were often publicly executed to show the world what happened to those who defied the crown. And if you were unlucky enough to be a pirate who got captured during a particularly brutal naval battle, you might not even get a quick death. Instead, you could face torture, or be made to suffer for days before being executed. The Navy made sure that everyone knew what happened to pirates who got caught. They didn't just lose their treasure, they lost their lives. The problem with being a pirate is that it wasn't just about fighting for treasure, it was about fighting for your life. Even the most successful pirates, the ones who seemed to have it all, had to constantly deal with the looming threat of capture. You might win a battle, seize a ship, or take a town. But the threat of the Navy always remained. You might think that getting away with one robbery was a victory, but the moment you thought you could rest, you'd realize that the real enemy wasn't another pirate. It was the relentless pursuit of the law. Being a pirate was an unpredictable life, but that's also what made it dangerous. You never knew when the Navy was going to appear, and when they did, they could end your pirating career in an instant. So every time you left port, you had to weigh the odds. Was it worth risking your life for another raid? Or was it better to keep your head down, avoid the Navy, and try to survive until the next opportunity came? Most pirates didn't live long enough to see their riches. They spent their lives running hiding and constantly looking over their shoulders, waiting for the moment when they'd be found out. The idea of a glorious pirate life where you'd retire on a beach with your treasure was mostly a pipe dream. Instead, pirates lived a short, brutal life, always on the move, always trying to outlast the law. As much as you may have dreamed of freedom when you first signed on, it's starting to sink in now, isn't it? The freedom of being a pirate isn't real. Freedom, it's a constant struggle to stay one step ahead of the law. Even the most successful pirates like Blackbeard or Calico Jack met their end at the hands of the Navy. Pirates were rebels, but they were also prisoners trapped in a life of violence, danger, and constant fear of being caught. No matter how many battles you win, no matter how much treasure you steal, the Navy is always out there waiting for their chance to bring you down. Piracy was never about freedom. It was about survival and nothing more. And when you start to understand that, you realize that the pirate life isn't the glamorous existence you imagined. It's not about plundering treasure or living in luxury. It's about fighting, evading capture, and hoping that you don't get caught before it's all over. The real question is, can you survive long enough to see another sunrise? By now, you've got splinters in your hands, salt crust in your hair, and you've probably eaten more worms out of hardtack than actual bread. But there's something else gnawing at you literally. The slow, creeping, body-rotting reality of pirate health. If you thought the sea was your greatest enemy surprise, it's your own body that'll betray you first. Let's start with the mouth, because nothing screams pirate authenticity like a smile full of blackened gums and missing teeth. Remember that scurvy we talked about earlier? Yeah, it doesn't just make you weak. It makes your gums swell, your teeth loosen, and your breath so foul that even the rats avoid you. You try to chew your salted pork, but your molars say not today, and suddenly you're spitting blood. You'd think a bunch of toothless pirates would be comical, but in real life, it was tragic. Pirates had no dentists, and the closest thing to an extraction was a crewmate yanking your molar out with a pair of rusty pliers, or maybe just a knife. Anesthetics. Don't make me laugh. They gave you a rope to bite and a bottle of rum to cry into. And your stomach, that's not faring any better. Remember the food situation. Rancid meat, stale biscuits, and water stored in barrels that grew algae like a middle school science project. You'd drink it anyway because dehydration was worse. Then you'd spend the night curled in a corner, praying the cramps would pass and not become dysentery. Or worse, cholera. And don't expect privacy while you're clutching your stomach and cursing the cook. The latrine, if you can even call it that, is just a wooden beam over the back of the ship. One strong wave and you're fish food. Still, you might be thinking, okay, but pirates were tough, right? Didn't they have high pain tolerance? Sure, because they had to. You can't call in sick. You can't rest up with soup and a warm blanket. You work sick. You hoist sails with a fever. You tie rigging while coughing your lungs up. And when you finally collapse, no one tucks you in, they just shove you aside so you're not in the way. Injuries. Oh, they happen daily. You don't really notice until the infection sets in. You nick your leg on a splintered rail. No big deal, right? 2 days later, it's swollen red and oozing something yellow. There are no antibiotics, no sterile gauze, no clean water. If someone's feeling generous, they'll heat a blade and try to cauterize the wound. If they're not well, hope you don't like walking. Amputation was a solution, though you'd pray you never needed one. Imagine your fellow crewmates sawing through your leg with whatever sharp thing they could find, maybe singing to distract you. Not because it helped you'd still scream until your throat tore, but because screaming was bad for morale. And then there are the skin problems. Constant exposure to the sun, salt wind and filth turns your skin into one giant rash. You scratch so much in your sleep that you wake up bleeding. The bilge water below deck is a breeding ground for bacteria, and it seeps into everything: your clothes, your bedding, your bones. Lice and fleas infest your hair. You're itchy, miserable, and completely helpless. Showers, baths, soap. Keep dreaming. Historians still argue whether pirates were truly more disease-ridden than naval sailors, or just less equipped to deal with it. Some suggest the lack of discipline made pirates more vulnerable. Sailors in the Royal Navy at least had rudimentary routines and some idea of sanitation. But pirates, they worked when they felt like it, cleaned when absolutely forced, and medical treatment was often nothing more than a drunken guess and a lot of rum. Speaking of rum, yes, pirates drank it constantly, but not just for fun. Alcohol, particularly grog, a mix of rum water and sometimes lime juice, if you were lucky, was often safer than water. It killed bacteria, numbed pain, and dulled the creeping realization that your body was slowly falling apart. But excessive drinking brought its own set of problems. Liver failure, dehydration, hallucinations. Pick your poison quite literally. You might be buzzed, but your body's still wasting away beneath the skin. Of course, the worst part of pirate health wasn't what happened to you. It was what happened to the crew around you. Disease spread like wildfire. One person gets sick, and suddenly the whole ship is coughing. Typhus, smallpox, fevers that came out of nowhere, they'd sweep through the hold with chilling efficiency. And quarantine, the sick were either tossed overboard or shoved below deck to rot away in the dark. No one wants to admit it, but pirates knew the math: fewer mouths to feed, less risk to the rest. Some captains didn't hesitate to lighten the load when things got ugly. You start to notice that no one ever really looks well on a pirate ship. Everyone's eyes are sunken. Skin is pallid or burned. Hair is matted. Most of the crew has a perpetual limp, a hacking cough, or both. And when someone does die, it's not dramatic. It's quiet, with a whimper and a groan, wrapped in a stained sheet and slipped into the sea, while the others eat their morning meal. You don't even get a moment of silence. The ship doesn't stop. It can't. And maybe worst of all is what happens to your mind. The isolation, the sickness, the discomfort, they start to chew away at you like the worms in your biscuits. You forget what day it is. You forget what dry land smells like. You stop thinking about the future because there's no version of it that doesn't involve more pain. You start seeing things in the waves, or you hear whispers that no one else hears. Was it the fever talking the rum? Or have you simply reached the point where your mind's cracking slowly, like the wood underfoot? You try not to show it. If you start acting strange, the crew gets nervous. If they think you're too weak, too unstable, they won't waste time checking in. They'll throw you overboard or leave you tied to the mast. Pirates don't have therapists. They have ropes and rum and short tempers. You keep it inside every hallucination, every dark thought. You fake a smile. You joke about the lice, but inside something's unraveling, and you know it. So the next time you hear someone say, "I wish I were a pirate," maybe ask them, do you enjoy gingivitis? Would you like trench foot? How about hallucinating from dehydration while your fingernails fall off? Because that's what it meant to be a pirate, not swaggering across a deck with a parrot on your shoulder, but trying to keep your teeth in your mouth, your limbs attached, and your sanity intact. The pirates' real battle wasn't with the Navy or rival crews, it was with their own body. The sea might drown you, but your health would fail you long before that. Every sunrise you witness becomes its own quiet miracle. And as you lie awake staring at the moldy boards above you, begin to wonder, how much longer can you keep this up? You've made it this far without dying of scurvy, losing a limb, or being hurled overboard in a drunken brawl. Congrats. But don't relax just yet. Tonight, we're delving into something that'll make your teeth clench and your spine stiffen even more than a sudden gust hitting the sails at midnight. Pirate justice. Now you may be thinking, surely pirates had no real rules, right? Total chaos. And sort of. Pirates didn't follow the laws of kings or colonies, but they weren't completely lawless. No, they had their own version of order, raw, improvised, and about as gentle as being hit with a cannonball. Pirate justice was quick, brutal, and deeply personal. And when it came for you, it didn't care if it was your first offense or your 50th. Let's say you're caught stealing a second helping of salt pork. Not exactly grand theft, right? But out here, food is sacred. The quartermaster sees you slip that extra chunk into your coat, and oops, you're hauled up in front of the crew within minutes. There's no judge, no jury, just a semicircle of sunburned, bored, and cranky pirates ready to decide your fate based on who's had the least sleep and the most grog. Some days you might get off with a beating. Other days it's keel hauling. Now, keel hauling is not a punishment you forget. You're tied to a rope tossed over the side of the ship and dragged beneath the keel from one side to the other. That's the part of the ship covered in barnacles, razor-sharp little sea demons. If you're lucky, you come out the other side with a shredded back. If you're not, well, those barnacles will slice you open, and you'll drown in your own blood before the salt water can even finish its job. And that's one of the lighter punishments, lying about loot. That might get your nose sliced off, starting a fight with the captain. Your ear could go missing, or your whole head depending on the mood that day. Steal from the ship's stores, sabotage a mission, or whisper the word mutiny, and you could be marooned. That's right, left on a tiny barren island with nothing but a bottle of water and maybe a pistol. If you're lucky. A real-life timeout with a death sentence baked in. Historians still argue whether pirate punishment was more about maintaining order or feeding the bloodlust of a lawless society. Some claim it was necessary. These were desperate men under impossible stress, and harsh consequences were the only way to hold things together. Others argue that it was often arbitrary violent for the sake of violence, especially under captains who relished power. The truth? Probably both. Pirate justice didn't care much for ethics. It cared about keeping chaos from boiling over. Barely. Here's the wild part, though. Pirates often voted on punishment. Yeah, this wasn't some top-down authoritarian command. At least, not always. The pirate code, when followed, was weirdly democratic. Crews would hold votes to decide who got punished and how. Of course, democracy among pirates was more of a popularity contest crossed with a bar fight. If you had friends, you might get a slap on the wrist. If people were already annoyed at your snoring, you'd end up lashed to the mast for 3 days in the sun with no water. See it. Sometimes the crew turned punishment into a show. They'd make you stand before everyone, confess your sins, and then deliver the sentence with all the flair of a traveling executioner. Public lashings were common: 10, 20, even 50 lashes, with a cat-o'-nine-tails, a multi-tailed whip that tore skin from bone. Your shirt would stick to your back fused with blood. You'd scream, then go hoarse, then go silent. The crew would watch. Some would laugh, some would wince. Most would just shrug. Another day, another bloody mess to mop up. But don't assume this was all about stealing rations or mouthing off. Sometimes pirate justice kicked in for reasons far more unsettling. Take the case of insubordination. Let's say you refuse to carry out an order because it's suicidal, storming a heavily armed ship sailing straight into a reef, or attacking a port crawling with soldiers. If the captain deems your refusal as cowardice, you could be shackled below deck, beaten senseless, or again, marooned. Morality doesn't count for much when you're trying to enforce shaky leadership aboard a leaky coffin. And then there's what happens when things go too far, like actual murder. If you kill a fellow pirate in cold blood, without a duel, or cause, even the loosest crew will likely turn on you. Pirates might have been criminals, but there were lines you weren't supposed to cross. That said, those lines were written in the sand and moved whenever convenient. If the murderer had allies, if the victim was unpopular, if the timing was bad for morale, Justice might just be conveniently postponed or skipped. But don't think you're safe from justice just because you're on the good side. Let's say you're a model crewmate, quiet, loyal, hardworking. You still have to watch your back. Why? Because pirates operated on suspicion and paranoia. A rumor was enough to ruin you. One whisper that you were hoarding coins, flirting with the wrong crew member's partner during shore leave, or planning to jump ship could end in punishment. Proof optional. Just being accused could ruin your life. There were, of course, pirates who tried to run a tight ship with fair rules. Captains like Bartholomew Roberts had codes against gambling, drinking during duty, or bringing women on board. Some pirate codes even forbade fighting aboard ship and settled disputes on shore in regulated duels. But in the end, enforcement came down to strength, reputation, and whether or not the crew still respected or feared you. The greatest irony, for all their disdain of authority and law, pirates recreated their own systems of control, because they had to. Put dozens of desperate men on a ship with nowhere to go, and you'll need rules fast. But these rules were as fragile as the sails overhead. They bent, they broke, and sometimes they shattered. One wrong step, and pirate justice would come down on you like a cannonball, quick, loud, and final. And perhaps that's what made it so terrifying. There were no appeals, no one to plead your case. Your judge was the sea, your jury was half drunk and half crazed, and the executioner was whichever crewmate happened to be holding the rope. So as you lay in your hammock tonight, if you're lucky enough to have one, you might want to keep one eye open. Because you never know if someone's watching, waiting to settle a grudge, or whisper your name into the captain's ear. One slip, and pirate justice could come for you before the sun rises. By now, the dirt's under your nails, your teeth hurt when you chew, and your hammock smells like wet wool soaked in fish guts. You've lived the pirate life long enough to know it's no picnic. But here's the strangest thing. Despite all this, despite the scurvy, the backstabbing, the constant looming death, people still love pirates. They dress up like them, make movies about them, and host parties where they shout "Arr" unironically over plastic tankards of fruit punch. Why? Why does the world insist on romanticizing a life that frankly sucked? Let's crack open this odd little cultural treasure chest. Pirates have been transformed into something they never really were. Charming rogues with hearts of gold and eyeliner that doesn't run even during a storm. The modern image is all billowing coats, clever quips, secret maps, and swashbuckling sword fights. But the real pirate experience was less heroic outlaw and more chronically dehydrated knife fighter with intestinal parasites. Pop culture has twisted this gritty survival story into a fantasy. Think about the movies, Jack Sparrow stumbling around with rum in hand, slurring out witticisms, while somehow never suffering from trenchfoot or lice. In those films, even the dirty parts of pirate life are sexy. There's danger, sure, but it's romanticized. The violence glossed over. The smells conveniently omitted. The food. Somehow, always a roast leg of meat, and not salted gristle floating in weevil soup. You know better now. You've lived through the real thing, or at least listened long enough to feel like you have. You know that most pirate adventures consisted of endless boredom, broken up by bursts of panic, terror, or illness. There were no theme songs. No one swung on ropes with a wink. If you tried to do a dramatic leap off the mast, you'd probably break your leg and then die from the infection. And yet, we love pirates. We can't get enough of them. Books, games, costumes, rides, you name it. Somewhere along the way, pirates became lovable. Rebels, anti-heroes, the cool older cousins of history's usual suspects. But how did this happen? Historians still argue whether the turning point was 18th century pulp fiction or early Hollywood films. In the 1700s, there were already pirate memoirs circulating, many of them ghost-written or downright fabricated. These books turned bloodthirsty cutthroats into bold adventurers, and readers couldn't get enough. The truth was ugly, but the fantasy sold. Later in the 20th century, filmmakers picked up where those early authors left off, dressing actors in spotless coats and choreographing graceful duels on pristine decks. By the time Disney released Pirates of the Caribbean in the 2000s, the myth was fully entrenched. Pirates weren't criminals anymore. They were misunderstood misfits with a flair for the dramatic. Even the symbols we associate with pirates got cleaned up. The Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones, used to be a sign that you were about to be boarded, robbed, and maybe set on fire. Today, it's on lunchboxes, the same symbol that once inspired sailors to throw their valuables overboard in panic now decorates birthday cakes. The gritty reality of terror on the open sea has been stripped down to iconography and catchphrases. And let's not forget the treasure. Buried gold, mysterious maps, and secret islands are staples of every pirate story. But as you already know, real pirates rarely buried their loot. Most of the time, there wasn't any loot. They stole cloth tools, food, and anything else they could resell or survive on. Gold. That was a jackpot, not a guarantee. Yet pop culture has convinced us that pirates spent their days digging holes on remote beaches, carefully hiding their coins with a big X on a map. In reality, if you got gold, you spent it quickly, usually on alcohol, gambling, or basic supplies. Nobody was preserving wealth for a rainy day. Pirates didn't have rainy day funds, they were the rainy day. Maybe part of the myth endures because pirates lived outside the system. No kings, no landlords, no taxes. In an era where most people were chained to the land or the state, pirates floated in a kind of chaotic freedom. And chaos, when you're looking at it from a comfortable armchair a few centuries later, can seem thrilling. Pirates didn't answer to anyone until the Navy caught them, of course. That kind of wild autonomy looks attractive in hindsight, especially when you ignore the gangrene and casual murder. There's also the undeniable cool factor. Pirates just looked epic when you're not focusing on the lice and grime. Long coats, boots, sabers, earrings. Even their bad hygiene has been weirdly rebranded as rugged. Modern pirate cosplay includes eyeliner and swagger, not bleeding gums and oozing sores. We've glamorized the filth, packaged it for Halloween, and turned it into personality. You can wear a pirate costume and feel rebellious, dangerous, even sexy, without having to puke into a bucket during a storm while someone vomits next to you. But beneath the surface, there's something else at play, something deeper. Pirates symbolize a kind of rebellion that speaks to the powerless. They're outsiders, people who said no thanks to the crushing rules of their time. The monarchy, the church, the rigid class system, pirates rejected all of it. They didn't care about social hierarchy, and they certainly didn't care about decorum. And maybe, just maybe, that's what draws people in. Not the violence or the loot, but the fantasy of tearing up the rulebook. The irony, of course, is that the rulebook tore them up right back. The vast majority of pirates didn't die rich or old. They died young, painfully, and often anonymously. There were no gravestones, no eulogies, just the endless sea swallowing them whole, and a world that moved on quickly. But pop culture gives them something they never had in life: legacy. Fame, songs, commemorative mugs. And so, the myth survives. It grows. It evolves. Pirates become anti-hero symbols of rebellion and mischief. We forget, or choose to forget, the endless suffering that came with the job. We remember the adventure, the freedom, the legend. Not the lice, the lashings, or the way your lungs filled with seawater because the captain made a bad call during a storm. Maybe that's just how stories work. We take the ugly truth, dress it up in leather and lace, and sell it back to ourselves with a wink. You know better now. But when someone at a party yells ahoy in a foam hat and plastic sword, you'll smile. Because sure, it's not real. But for a moment, it lets people believe in something wild, free, and fearless. Just don't let them near a real pirate ship. let's talk about treasure. Because honestly, if there's one thing that keeps the pirate fantasy alive, it's the shiny stuff. Gold doubloons, silver chalices, gemstones the size of your eyeball, all supposedly buried beneath palm trees, just waiting for someone with a map and a shovel. And sure, the idea is thrilling: secret islands, cryptic riddles, X marks the spot. But out here in your crusty hammock, your stomach growling, your boots soggy for the third week straight, you're starting to suspect the whole thing might be, well, exaggerated. Let's get one thing clear right away: most pirates didn't bury treasure. Like, at all. They didn't have time for it, for one thing. Picture it. You've just risked your life in a naval skirmish. Your ship's damaged, your crew is half dead or half drunk, and now you're supposed to go find a secluded island, dig a big hole, and hide your loot like a squirrel. No. You sell it. Fast. You divvy up what you can, trade the rest, and spend it before it's stolen, or before you die. Most pirate loot wasn't even gold. It was practical stuff: barrels of sugar spices, rum, cloth, rope, gunpowder, tools. Occasionally silver, yes, very occasionally gold. But more often, it was just things that could be resold or repurposed. A captured merchant ship might have a few coins and some jewelry, but the real treasure was in whatever was on board that had value in a black market economy. Stolen cargo wasn't glamorous, it was survival. You weren't stuffing rubies in a velvet pouch. You were hauling sacks of rice and hoping they weren't full of bugs. So where did this whole buried treasure myth come from? Historians still argue whether it stemmed from a handful of real incidents or pure literary invention. The most cited case is Captain William Kidd, who reportedly buried some of his treasure on Gardiner's Island in New York before being captured and hanged in 1701. But even then, the buried treasure was likely just an attempt to negotiate his way out of execution. Spoiler, it didn't work. He swung from the gallows anyway, and most of the treasure never found, or never existed. And then came the books. In 1724, a mysterious figure known as Captain Charles Johnson, likely a pseudonym, published A General History of the Pirates. It was packed with wild tales of adventure, betrayal, and yep, buried treasure. The book was a massive success, and suddenly, pirates weren't just thieves anymore. They were mysterious legends hiding vast fortunes in uncharted territories. Fast forward to 1883, and Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island cements the image: a one-legged pirate, a parrot, and a map marked with an X. That book did more to shape the pirate myth than actual pirate history ever could. But here's the funny part. Even though real pirates didn't bury treasure, that didn't stop people from looking for it. All over the world, lost pirate gold has inspired treasure hunters to dig holes in beaches, comb through caves, and even fund entire expeditions. Most of them found nothing but sunburn and disappointment. Some found a few coins likely dropped by traders or sailors centuries ago. And yet, the legend persists because humans love a mystery. We want there to be a forgotten chest out there, just beneath the sand, waiting to be discovered. But let's say, for argument's sake, that you do find treasure. What then? First off, your crew will probably kill you for it. Greed isn't a feeling pirates handled well. If they even suspected you were holding back a share or hiding a coin, you'd be tied to the mast or worse. There are dozens of accounts of pirates turning on their own over a single gold ring. Paranoia ran deep, and trust. That was rarer than rubies. You'd be lucky to make it off the island alive, let alone keep your loot. And even if you did survive the crew, what would you do with the treasure? Pirates couldn't exactly stroll into a bank and make a deposit. Most ports were hostile to pirates, and walking around with a bag full of foreign gold tended to raise questions. So pirates turned to fences underground, dealers who bought stolen goods, no questions asked. Of course, those fences took a hefty cut. By the time your coins changed hands 3 times, the fortune you risked your life for might not even buy you a decent pair of boots. Not to mention, money doesn't last long when you live like a pirate. Let's say you get your share of a big score, maybe some silver, a gold necklace, a bit of coin. You hit land, and what do? You drink. You gamble. You buy all the comforts you've been dreaming of on that wretched ship: fresh food, warm beds, someone who'll pretend to like you for a few coins. And just like that, it's gone. You're broke again. And the cycle begins anew. There's a saying among pirates: easy come, easy go. And it wasn't just a joke, it was survival strategy. You couldn't afford to hold on to wealth for long. Not just because others would take it, but because the sea would. Shipwrecks were common. Storms could destroy everything. You could be killed in a skirmish tomorrow. So why save for the future when the future probably ends with cannon fire? Every once in a while, someone would try to hold on to their loot, stash it away, maybe even plan to retire. But retirement was rare. Peaceful endings were almost non-existent. The pirate world didn't offer golden sunsets and quiet country homes. It offered a short life, a hard death, and maybe, if you were very lucky, a ghost story in your honor. More often, you were just another nameless body tossed to the waves. And yet, despite all the odds, the fantasy of buried treasure lives on. Maybe it's the idea that something valuable lies hidden just out of sight, that if you're brave or foolish enough, you might uncover it. It's an appealing thought, isn't it? That there's still mystery left in the world, that not everything has been mapped, explained, bought, or sold. But now that you've felt the creak of the boards under your feet, smelled the rot in the barrels, and watched the crew snarl over scraps of spoiled meat, you know better. Treasure was never the goal. It was the excuse. A dream to chase while you tried to survive long enough to make the next port. Pirates didn't live for gold. They lived despite it. And when they died, it wasn't with coins in their hands. It was with dirt under their nails and salt in their veins. So, next time you see an old map or hear a tale of hidden gold, remember, the real treasure was probably something far more boring, like a clean shirt, a bottle of drinkable water, or 2 nights on dry land without a fight. Let's say things finally go south. Maybe you were caught mid-raid, or your ship ran into a Navy frigate with more cannons than you had bones. Maybe it was a crewmate who betrayed you, sold you out in exchange for a pardon and a bag of silver. Either way, you're not free anymore. You're captured, shackled, dragged from the docks like a stray dog, and now you're about to discover the part of piracy that everyone skips over during movie night. What actually happened when a pirate got caught. Spoiler alert, it wasn't great. First came the holding cell, usually a damp, windowless chamber that smelled like wet wood, old fish, and every other terrified prisoner who'd been through it before. If you were lucky, they gave you food. If not, you might nibble on moldy bread and hope no one noticed you were still alive. Rats became your roommates, cold stone your mattress. Your only view was whatever sliver of light crept under the door. And the worst part, waiting, because the only thing more brutal than being a pirate is being a pirate waiting to die. Trial came next if you got one. Many pirates were executed on the spot, especially in smaller colonies with no patience or proper courts. But if your captors felt like making a show of it, they'd put you on trial. Not in some neutral courtroom with fair judges and powdered wigs asking polite questions. No, you stood in front of a furious jury of colonial officials who'd had enough of pirates like you. This was their moment. And you were the living example they'd use to terrify every would-be sailor with dreams of rebellion. There were testimonies often from witnesses who barely remembered what happened, or better yet, former pirates who turned informant to save their own skins. You might even recognize someone you shared a hammock with, now pointing a shaky finger in your direction while whispering, "That's him. That's the one." You want to hate them, but deep down you know you'd have done the same. The gallows wait for no one. The verdict, almost always guilty. The punishment, almost always death. Historians still argue whether the courts gave pirates any real chance of justice. Some trials, especially in England, were technically legal proceedings with records, evidence, and lawyers. But most were theater performances for the public designed to showcase law and order. Whether you plundered a dozen ships or just happened to be on the wrong boat at the wrong time, the outcome was usually the same. Once labeled a pirate, your fate was sealed. And what a fate it was. Hanging was the preferred method, and it wasn't done quietly. Public executions were events. People brought their families packed lunches and made a whole afternoon of it. Children perched on shoulders, vendors sold beer. And you stood barefoot on the scaffold, hands tied a rough rope already itching at your throat. Sometimes they let you speak your final words shouted over a restless crowd. Maybe you asked forgiveness. Maybe you cursed the king. Maybe you just screamed. Then came the drop. If you were lucky, your neck snapped clean. If not, you dangled, kicking, twitching, slowly strangling as the crowd watched. Pirates were often left hanging for days, their bodies swinging in the sea breeze as a warning to others. In some coastal cities, they even dipped the corpses in tar to preserve them. Black, gleaming shapes hanging from gibbets at the harbor entrance. Welcome ashore, they seemed to say. Behave, or else. And yet, as horrific as that sounds, hanging wasn't the worst fate. Some pirates were sentenced to hard labor, decades chained in mines or damp prisons, where death came slowly, one aching joint at a time. Others were flogged publicly, then branded. A P burned into their flesh to mark them forever. Some were even broken on the wheel, a method so barbaric it makes hanging seem polite. You were tied to a wooden frame, limbs stretched out, and then one by one your bones were shattered with iron bars. It could take hours. Sometimes you lived through it. But the most twisted fate of all, being pardoned. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? A second chance. Freedom. A new life. Except, you'd never really be free. A pirate with a pardon was a man without a country. No one trusted you. Other pirates thought you were a traitor. The authorities kept you on a leash, ready to haul you back in the moment you stepped out of line. Some pardoned pirates were forced to become pirate hunters themselves, tracking down old friends in exchange for their lives. Can you imagine that, staring across a deck at the man who once shared your water rations, now armed and furious because you chose to survive? Pirates didn't forgive, and they didn't forget. Sometimes, if you were very clever or very lucky, you could disappear. Blend into a port town, grow a beard. Change your name, take up some quiet trade like fishing or carpentry. You might marry, raise a family, try to forget, but you'd never truly relax. Every ship on the horizon, every knock at your door, it could be the end. Of course, there were legends. Tales of pirates who escaped justice, slipped away with their treasure, and lived in secret luxury. But legends are comforting lies we tell ourselves. The truth. Most pirates ended up dead, imprisoned, or betrayed. The life they chose didn't come with a retirement plan, and maybe that's what makes it so eerie. The pirate life promised freedom, but delivered death. It offered rebellion, but ended in chains. And yet for a brief moment, you were truly alive. Every decision mattered. Every risk was real. There's something raw about that. Honest even. You lived fast, and you died fast. The in-between was chaos, yes, but it was yours. Now, as you sit here imagining the creak of the noose, the jeering of the crowd, you realize the worst part isn't dying. It's not even the pain. It's knowing you won't be remembered. No one will sing your name in a sea shanty. No statues, no markers, just the sound of waves against the dock and a rope swinging in the wind. So, if you're still dreaming about being a pirate, consider this. Can you live with the odds stacked against you and die without leaving a mark? Because in this world, You don't sail off into the sunset. You swing into it. Alright, it's time we talk about the one part of pirate life that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Listen. That's right. Women did sail under the black flag, though if you were one, you had to be twice as fierce, twice as ruthless, and 3 times as careful. Because if you thought it was hard being a male pirate covered in sores, sleeping in a rat-infested hammock, ducking Navy bullets, imagine doing all that in a corset while the entire crew is debating whether you're bad luck, a liability, or a prize. Let's be clear from the start. Piracy was overwhelmingly male. Most pirate crews didn't allow women on board at all. There was a deep-rooted superstition that women brought bad luck to ships. Storms blamed on women. Failed raids, women. Scurvy. Okay, maybe not scurvy, but if a woman showed up, people were just waiting for disaster. And yet against all odds, a few women not only joined pirate crews, they became legends. The 2 most famous were Anne Bonny and Mary Read. If you've ever heard someone say, "There were women pirates too," you know these are the 2 they're referring to. Their stories are tangled in myth and half-truths, but the core is real. They were on a pirate ship. They fought. They killed. And they did it while pretending, at least at first, not to be women at all. Mary Read disguised herself as a man from an early age. She joined the British military under male identity, fought in wars, and eventually ended up on a pirate ship after being captured at sea. Anne Bonny, on the other hand, was openly rebellious. She left her well-off family to run off with the notorious pirate Calico Jack Rackham. Together, they pillaged ships in the Caribbean, with Anne often dressing as a man during battles. But here's the thing, even dressed as men, they still had to constantly prove themselves. Every day was a test. Could they fight, kill, intimidate, carry their weight literally? They had to shout louder, swing harder, and outsnarl every grimy sailor on deck. One slip, and they'd be dead or worse. And if they were discovered, life got even more complicated. Pirate crews weren't exactly havens of feminism. If a woman was found out, reactions varied from forced expulsion to sexual violence to execution. Some captains didn't care if you had a hidden identity as long as you fought. Others used it as an excuse to get rid of you. Women pirates weren't just fighting the law and the sea, they were fighting every sexist assumption their crewmates held. Historians still argue whether women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read were outliers or part of a broader, largely undocumented wave of female pirates. It's true that most maritime records ignored or erased women entirely, and given that disguises were often involved, there's a real chance we'll never know how many women lived this life. Some were wives or lovers of pirates brought aboard out of desperation or loyalty. Others were enslaved women who turned pirate as a means of escape. And some simply refused to accept the roles that society forced on them, seeing piracy as the only route to any real power, even if that power was stained in blood. But if life was hard for pirate men, it was brutal for women. If you were captured, your fate depended entirely on who was holding the chains. Some were imprisoned, some were executed alongside the men, others were spared and subjected to horrors that don't need spelling out. If you think the courtroom showed mercy to a woman, pirate, think again. Anne and Mary were only briefly spared execution because they were pregnant at the time. What courts called pleading the belly. A gruesome technicality, really. They weren't spared out of compassion, just delayed. Mary died in prison. Anne's fate remains a mystery, though many believe she was quietly released, possibly due to her wealthy father's influence. And what about women who stayed on land? Wives lovers, or sisters of pirates. They didn't have it easy either. If their male relatives were caught, women were often imprisoned, publicly shamed, or driven into poverty. Some were accused of aiding pirates, even if they hadn't. Just being associated with a pirate could ruin your life. Yet many women still risked everything to support, protect, or even join the men they loved. It wasn't a glamorous decision, it was survival. There's also the question of what roles women played in pirate ports, like Nassau or Tortuga. These ports were chaotic hubs of crime trade and all the vices you could imagine. Women ran taverns, served as smugglers, acted as informants, and in some cases, yes, commanded small fleets of their own. These weren't damsels waiting to be rescued. They were schemers, survivors, and sometimes outright leaders. Take Qing Shi, for example. She wasn't a Caribbean pirate, but her story is too powerful to ignore. A former prostitute in China who married a pirate captain, Qing Shi, took control of his fleet after his death. And not just any fleet, we're talking over 300 ships and tens of thousands of pirates. She imposed strict rules, defeated the Chinese Navy, and eventually negotiated retirement with full immunity. Imagine that. While most pirates were hanging from gallows, Qing Shi retired rich and untouchable. That's how you rewrite the script. But let's not pretend even she had it easy. Her authority was constantly challenged. She had to crush rebellions, outmaneuver generals, and enforce laws that many found harsh. But she held her own. And in doing so, she became one of the most successful pirates in history, male or female. Still, most women in the pirate world weren't so lucky. They lived in constant fear of being discovered, exploited, or discarded. There were no guarantees, no safety nets, and certainly no solidarity. Pirate ships weren't equal opportunity employers. Every step forward had to be carved out with fists, blades, or brilliant deception. Being a woman on a pirate ship meant playing a game rigged from the start and still refusing to lose. And maybe that's why their stories still resonate. Because there's something undeniably powerful about women who, in the face of a world telling them to stay quiet, grabbed a sword instead. They weren't perfect. They weren't saints. But they lived on their own terms, however fleeting that freedom may have been. So next time you hear a sea shanty, or see a girl in a pirate costume at a Halloween party, remember she's not just playing dress-up. She's channeling a long legacy of rebellion, of women who dared to claim a place where none was offered, of warriors in disguise, outlaws in skirts, and survivors with grit under their nails. Being a woman pirate wasn't about glory. It was about clawing your way through a world that wanted you silent and making sure they heard you anyway. By now you know that life on a pirate ship was anything but noble. If you came here looking for honor among thieves, you've probably been disappointed, and let's be honest, maybe lightly stabbed. Tonight, we're wading into one of the murkiest waters of all pirate politics. Not the vote for me kind, more like the trust no one and sleep with one eye open kind. See, the pirate ship was a strange place. It wasn't entirely democratic, nor was it a pure dictatorship. It was something in between a floating pressure cooker, fueled by power struggles, grudges, booze, and just enough mutual interest to keep everyone from murdering each other too quickly. Pirates didn't follow king's laws or church mandates, but that didn't mean they didn't have rules. They just made their own, and then often broke them. Let's talk about that pirate code everyone's so obsessed with. Was it real? Sort of. Most ships had their own version written or agreed upon at the start of a voyage. These codes laid out how loot would be divided, what happened in disputes, and how discipline worked. Some codes banned gambling, fighting on board, or bringing women and children on the ship. Others had surprisingly progressive policies, like compensation for injured crew members, lose an arm, and you got a set amount of gold. It sounds generous until you realize you had to lose a limb to get it. Historians still argue whether these pirate codes were sincere attempts at order or just convenient guidelines meant to keep the crew from killing each other too early. Many believe the codes were a practical necessity, a way to create some sense of order in a world full of chaos. After all, a ship wasn't a kingdom. It was a cramped, filthy tube of powder kegs and cutthroats, and if you didn't establish some sort of structure, you'd be sunk before you even spotted your first merchant vessel. But here's the thing, no matter how many rules you scribbled down, power on a pirate ship was always personal. The moment someone stopped fearing the captain, things got unstable. Respect could vanish overnight, especially if the loot dried up, the food spoiled, or the weather turned sour. Pirate authority wasn't handed down by birthright. It was earned often through charisma force or sheer audacity. And if you lost it, your crew might vote you off the ship, or toss you off it. Mutiny wasn't rare, it was baked into the system. A captain might start off popular, but one wrong decision, one botched raid, and suddenly the crew starts talking. And when they talked, they plotted. In the best-case scenario, a disgraced captain would be stripped of rank and demoted to just another sailor. Worst case, you were marooned on an island with a bottle of water and a pistol. The message was always clear, no one's irreplaceable. So, how did captains stay in power? It wasn't about loyalty, it was about results. As long as you kept the raids coming, the rum flowing, and the crew mostly alive, you could keep your hat. But the second morale dipped, the sharks started circling. The quartermaster was often the biggest threat. This was the crew member elected to represent the rest of the pirates, and in many cases, they had just as much power as the captain. They managed supplies, handled discipline, and could rally the crew against poor leadership. It was like having a vice president with a grudge and a cutlass. And then there were the unofficial alliances, the whispered deals between crew members. If politics on land are shady, politics at sea are downright poisonous. Backstabbing wasn't just metaphorical. You could rise through the ranks one day and find yourself locked in the bilge the next. Trust was always temporary, always conditional. You might have shared a drink with someone last night, but if they thought you were hoarding extra coins, you'd wake up tied to the mast. You could argue that pirate politics were a kind of proto-democracy. Everyone got a vote. Crews chose their leaders, shared the profits, and even held councils to settle disputes. But don't let the voting fool you, this wasn't some enlightened republic at sea. Votes were swayed by fear, friendship, or brute force. If the biggest guy on board wanted you gone, most people just nodded and voted aye. Disagreeing could get your throat slit in your sleep. And let's not forget the politics between ships. Pirate alliances were shaky at best. You might team up with another crew to raid a convoy, but afterward, all bets were off. Dividing the spoils caused endless arguments and sometimes open warfare. Pirates betrayed other pirates constantly. It wasn't personal, it was business. If another crew had something valuable and wasn't strong enough to defend it, you took it. The so-called Brotherhood of the Sea was less a fraternity and more like a knife fight at a family reunion. Even pirate havens like Nassau weren't immune to politics. These ports were wild hubs of smuggling trade and temporary truces. There were informal networks, allegiances, and codes of conduct, but they were paper thin. Bribes, threats, and shady deals ruled the day. Pirate leaders jockeyed for influence, tried to control access to supplies, or protect favored captains. Some pirates even tried to form governments' rudimentary councils meant to organize raids and manage resources. Most fell apart faster than a leaky dinghy. Ironically, some pirates turned into the very thing they once raided. As they grew more powerful, they became territorial, protective, and tyrannical. Pirate lords who controlled fleets or coastal towns started issuing commands, enforcing taxes, and punishing dissent. Sound familiar? The anarchists became aristocrats, and it never ended well. The moment you started acting like a king, your crew remembered how much they hated kings, and you got a knife between the ribs for your trouble. And yet, for all its violence and dysfunction, pirate politics had a strange resilience. It wasn't sustainable, but it worked just enough for a short, bloody time. Pirates may not have had nations or flags, but they had codes leaders and crude systems that kept the cannons loaded and the sails full. They were anarchists who accidentally built systems, rebels who needed rules, and murderers who still held meetings. You see it all now, don't you? This wasn't just a life of plunder, it was a life of constant negotiation. You had to read people, spot alliances, and stay 3 steps ahead. The sea was unforgiving. Yes, but the crew, they were worse. A single misstep, too much ambition, too much weakness, even too much luck, and you'd find yourself cast out, cut down, or quietly drowned. There were no saints on pirate ships, only survivors. So tonight, as you rest your head and imagine the creak of the ropes above, think about what it meant to lead in a world like this. No honor, no stability, just fragile power held tight by calloused hands and sharpened blades. And if you ever find yourself longing to be the captain, remember, every captain was only one bad decision away from becoming cargo. The end is coming, not just for you lying there in your hammock with your sore joints and your scabbed-over knuckles, but for piracy itself. You can feel it in the wind. It's not as wild as it used to be. The ports aren't as friendly. The sea's starting to get smaller, tighter. The golden age of piracy. The chaos, the blood, the dark freedom is sputtering out. You might not have realized it in the moment. You were too busy chasing another ship, arguing over your share of the loot, trying not to die of fever. But everything around you is changing. The authorities are getting smarter. The navy's stronger. Trade routes are shifting. Islands once ruled by pirates are being taken back by governors with fresh uniforms and shiny new gallows. You start to notice the signs: stricter patrols, fewer safe harbors, more whispers about pardons. Pirates were always living on borrowed time, and now the world wants its due. One of the biggest death knells came from the very place you used to count on the Caribbean. Once a pirate playground full of corrupt governors and safe havens like Nassau, it began to tighten under British control in the early 1700s. The British Crown got tired of losing ships and money. They cracked down. Hard. They sent warships, offered rewards for pirate captures, and even hired former pirates to hunt their own. Talk about poetic justice with a rusty edge. Some of the most famous names fell during this period. Blackbeard, Edward Teach, if you prefer legal names, was hunted down by Lieutenant Robert Maynard in 1718. It took multiple bullets and sword blows to bring him down. When they finally beheaded him, they hung his severed head from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship like a grotesque ornament. If ever there was a message to pirates everywhere, that was it: your time is up. The romantic legends of piracy. They start to die right here, one raid at a time, one hanging at a time. Pirate ships either surrendered or went silent. Some captains took the Crown's offer of amnesty, trading the sea for land and obscurity. Others fought until their ships burned and their bodies washed ashore. Most just vanished, never to be heard from again. Maybe they died quietly in some forgotten port. Maybe they buried their weapons and melted into fishing villages. Maybe they were just too tired to fight anymore. Historians still argue whether the decline of piracy was inevitable or orchestrated. Was it the natural end of an unsustainable lifestyle, or a systematic campaign by imperial powers to retake control of the seas? Probably both. Empires had the ships, the men, and the will to enforce their version of order, and piracy, for all its bravado, couldn't stand up to bureaucracies with cannons. There were other factors too. Trade networks changed. Naval technology advanced. Governments began to take ocean security seriously. Even pirates couldn't outrun time itself. The world got bigger, faster, more connected, and there just wasn't space left for floating anarchy. But let's be honest, the golden age of piracy didn't end with a bang. It ended with a slow, wheezing crawl. Pirates didn't vanish overnight. They adapted, sometimes badly. Smuggling took the place of open raiding. Some turned to slave trading, a dark, brutal pivot that traded rebellion for cruelty. Others tried to go straight working in docks or shipyards. But no matter what path they took, the thrill was gone. The sense of possibility, the raw freedom, had been hunted, hanged, and legislated out of existence. And now, you, dear pirate, are just another piece of that vanishing world. You might still see a few ships flying false colors, hoping to trick merchantmen. You might hear songs in taverns about long-lost captains and battles under full moons. But you know better. You know the bones those songs are built on. You know what the sea really costs. You've seen the hunger, the madness, the betrayal. You've watched good men rot from the inside and die with nothing to their name but scars. And you've come to understand something that no movie, no story, no theme park ride ever tells you. The pirate's life wasn't a dream. It was a deadline. There's no monument to the real pirates, no gold statues or quiet memorials at sea, only scattered bones, sunken hulls, and whispered legends. What's left is a myth, something smoother, cleaner, and easier to swallow than the truth. But somewhere out there beneath the waves, the real story waits. Not in treasure chests, but in the wreckage, the splinters, the silence. And as you lay back listening to the creak of the wood, the distant flap of sails in the wind, you realize that the end of piracy wasn't just about law and order. It was about exhaustion. Everyone got tired of running, of starving, of dying. The sea gave everything, but it also took everything. And in the end, even the fiercest pirate has to choose, keep fighting the tide or let go. So maybe this is where it ends for you. Maybe you're the last of your kind. Eyes closed, fingers curled around a compass that no longer points anywhere important. Maybe your ship is already half underwater and you're just waiting for the final wave. Or maybe somewhere deep down, you're already ashore, your boots in dry sand, your sword rusting quietly in the corner. You've made peace with the sea and all it never gave you. And now, it's time to rest. You're still here, still breathing, still afloat on this strange sea of stories. But now the waves are gentler, the sails quieter. The danger for once has passed. The storm has long since blown itself out, and all that's left is the calm hush of the ocean at night. Picture it, a moon hanging low over the water, casting soft silver over the gently rocking ship. The crew has gone quiet, and so has your mind. No shouting, no hunger, no fear. Just you, the stars, and the rhythm of the waves. You're no longer a pirate now. You're something simpler. A soul drifting toward shore. The world of blood and brine, of broken codes and mutiny, has loosened its grip. You can leave it behind. The hard wood beneath your back is warm now. The breeze is gentle. You feel weightless, clean even, as if all those years of salt and dirt have been rinsed away. There's no need to fight anymore, no need to look over your shoulder or clutch your blade beneath your pillow. The sea has taken what it wanted, and somehow you're still here, breathing softer, heart slowing, thoughts drifting like a bottle on the tide. Let it go. Let the world be quiet. Let the horizon fade. Just you and the night, and sleep